Hi, I just wanted to talk a little bit today about a way that you can help support your young adult. And I mean, someone who's a little bit more independent than like an early adolescent. So um, maybe this is your high school senior or certainly of driving age, but more likely young college age or even young adult child. Um, as things begin to open up around the country and as the restrictions start to be eased, especially if your child isn't living with you, or even if they are, but if they have, a great deal of freedom, um, because of the unique attributes of the adolescent brain. And the adolescent brain is still the adolescent brain until 22 to 25 years old. And depending on the amount of practice they've had at creating boundaries and making rational, critical thinking based decisions, it'll really vary. There's a huge spectrum. But I think it's important to recognize that young people this age are ridiculously socially driven. It is biological imperative for them to be in social connection with other people. And if your young adult has a pretty robust social network, especially in person, not online, um, it's going to be really, really tempting to sort of expand their bubble really quickly, especially if they've been in isolation for a while, if they've not been working, if they've not been out in the community, if they've not been hanging out with friends. Um, and it's going to be hard to make decisions that feel rational and maybe safe for them. But again, if they're independent, especially if they're not living in your home, that's something that they're going to have to do. Um, so I had a conversation with my daughter this morning who lives across the country in her own apartment. She's a college student. Um, Around how to decide, what do you do if you go to hang out with one or two friends that have been quarantining for a while and you feel really safe for them, and then three or four other people show up? And there are people that were in your social network. Maybe there are people that were in your fraternity or sorority. Maybe they were people that, you worked on a work study group with or whatever, but you know them socially. And normally you wouldn't think twice about hanging out with them. Um, the temptation to stay and be social um, in this situation is powerful, especially if you've been quarantining for a while. And so, how do you think about that? How do you? Peer pressure is real. The desire to not look like you're the Debbie Downer is real. So, how do you weigh those kinds of decisions? Um, and as we talked about it, the thing that I said to my daughter is I think it's really important for you to remember that when you're in that situation, you're making an emotional decision. You're much more likely to rationalize to yourself why it's fine and it's safe to stay and expand your bubble way bigger than you thought you were going to originally, because you want to be with friends. It feels really good to be socially connected with people that especially you haven't seen in a really long time, that you associate with having a good time. Um, so the advice that I gave her and the advice that I will give to my other daughter is this. When you're home alone by yourself in a calm, rational space where you're not feeling emotionally anxious or upset or sad about being isolated, um, take some time to think about what feels safe to you. Take some time to think about your boundaries. Take some time to think about what you know and what's worth it to you to risk. So if you're a person that is particularly prone to anxiety, maybe every time you go to the grocery store, you come home and you're really worried that, okay, somehow I contracted this virus and now, I'm going to get sick. If that is the way that your brain works already, then your threshold for social contact is probably going to be very different from someone who feels basically invincible, right? No judgment. This is about you deciding what your particular threshold is and what feels good and safe to you. For some people, that might involve doing some research. For some people, that might involve writing something down. But spend some time getting really clear on what your boundaries are. And so, for example, if you decide that your boundary is you only really want to socialize with people who have been isolating for at least 14 days, who are not working outside in high risk areas, and you don't want to socialize with anybody beyond that, if you come to that conclusion in a really clear moment when you're by yourself, then you can say, all right, in a scenario where I'm with this person and 3 of their friends show up, and I don't know where those people have been. Have they been home? Have they been working? Have they been in an apartment with multiple people? I don't have any idea. What would I do? What would I say? Do I have a script that I can put into place in my head that feels okay to me? And maybe that's avoidance. Maybe that's, oh my gosh, guys, you know what? I didn't realize I was supposed to FaceTime with my best friend from home at 3:00 and it's 2:45. I gotta go. It was great to see you. And you bow out. Or maybe it is, maybe you feel comfortable saying, wow, this is really not what I was planning today. I'm feeling a little anxious about this, and I think I need to go. Whatever your script is, if you come up with that script in a moment when you're calm, when you're not in the situation where you're feeling either worried or peer pressured or really just longing to be with those people, then you're more likely to be able to carry it out. But deciding what your boundaries are and not feeling like you have to justify them to anybody else is really, really important. And I will just say as a side note, I have had this conversation with both of my daughters around issues of sex and sexuality as well, because I think that that's another really, really important thing for them to think about in their room when they're by themselves, when they're not feeling physically aroused. What are my boundaries? What feels good to me? What doesn't feel good to me? And if I find myself in a situation with a partner where things are escalating, what's my tipping point? Where's the red flag? And what's the script that I use? Again, if we can come up with those things in a moment when we're feeling calm and not emotional, and we can work to embed that into our head, then we're more likely to be able to shift back and rely on that in a moment when we do feel that emotional trigger. I think it's also important to have the conversation with your young adult child that they don't have to justify that to anybody, whether we're talking about isolating for the coronavirus or sex and sexuality or substance use, whatever it is. We all have an absolute right to sovereignty over our bodies and our boundaries and our decisions. And there is no scenario in which you have to justify your comfort level to anybody else. Somebody else might try to convince you that you need to justify it, or that you're being a wimp, or that you're being a Debbie Downer, or that you've made your decision based on erroneous information. There's a million different things that could happen. But if we can help our kids understand that it is their right and also if you're in a relationship with someone, their responsibility to decide what their boundaries are and enforce those boundaries without apology, then that's a huge life skill. It's really important. And boundaries can be malleable. Over time, boundaries can change, and they will, absolutely. So maybe, 2 months from now or 2 weeks from now, my boundaries around who I'm willing to expand my bubble to are going to be very different. But again, getting caught sort of unaware or unprepared, I'm much more likely to make a really emotional decision or to shut down cognitively and not make a decision at all and just sort of hang out and let things happen. And then later, I may well regret having done that. So, again, the conversation I had with my daughter was, if you want to talk to me about this, we can totally talk about this. If you don't, that's fine. You don't have to justify your reasons to me. You don't have to explain your reasons to me. I want you to be safe. I absolutely want you to be safe. And she's 20 years old, and I have to trust on some level that I've given her the tools and the practice making difficult decisions, and that she cares enough about herself to want to stay healthy too. I feel really lucky that I'm in the position that I do feel like I can trust her to make those choices, but it's important to have the conversation. It's important to give her that idea of sitting alone in a quiet place when you're calm and getting really clear on what your boundaries are, so that if and when you're faced with this situation, you can have that memory of, oh yeah, I already thought about this, and here's what I thought. It's no guarantee that you won't still talk yourself out of it, because especially at this age, they're driven to be social. It's incredibly important for them to be social with friends. And they've been, many of them, really grieving the loss of those in-person social connections for months now. And when you're this age, it feels like everything is always going to be like this in some cases. They don't have the life experience yet to understand that, there will be plenty of opportunities and that things will change and that eventually it will be different. Because right now, when they're in the thick of it, it's all emotion driven. And so it's important to acknowledge that as well. So again, encourage them to sit and think about it in a quiet moment, or 2 or 3. Do it over a period of days, in whatever format feels good to them. And have a script in their head, have a clear idea of what their boundaries are and how they're going to deal with different scenarios that may or may not come up. If all the bars in town open up and all of a sudden, all of their college friends decide that means everything must be safe. If I don't feel really comfortable with that, but I don't want to be the only one who doesn't go out to the bars with my friends, what does that scenario look like? Can I come up with a way to say, is there outdoor seating? Can just the 3 of us go and kind of see what happens? And, come up with different scripts for different scenarios that honor your individual boundaries. And as always, feel free to email or comment here with ideas or thoughts or concerns about this. Visit my website. I am able to do Zoom one-on-one parenting, mindful parenting consulting. Or if you've got a group of parents that are interested in working together through some of the issues with adolescents and young adults, around their social emotional health and relationship issues within your family, reach out to me. We can figure something out. I've got some flexibility, and so far, Zoom stuff seems to be working pretty well. So I look forward to hearing from you with your thoughts about this, and everyone be well.